Summer of 1943. The Kursk salient. A Soviet tank crew commits an act that, under wartime law, warrants an immediate tribunal. They voluntarily turn their combat vehicle into a fire trap, literally smearing the tank's interior with combustible axle grease and church wax. An officer who witnessed this wanted to have them court-martialed for sabotage. After all, a single spark could turn the crew into ash in a second. But it was precisely this insane, lethal engineering solution cobbled together from scrap and desperation that allowed them to face an entire armada of German Tigers alone. You will learn how violating every instruction saved lives and the terrible price paid by the loader, whose heart stopped not from shrapnel, but from an inhuman rhythm of work. July 1943. The southern face of the Kursk salient. Noon. The sun hangs at its zenith, methodically scorching the steppe, turning the black earth into gray, fine dust. The air shimmers above the armor. If you were to lay a hand on the tank's frontal plate, the skin would instantly blanch, blister, and peel off like a glove. The metal temperature outside exceeds 140 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the fighting compartment, the thermometer reads 125 degrees. This is no longer the cabin of a combat vehicle. It is an industrial oven with 4 living organisms locked inside. Vasily Zhigun, the tank commander, sits at his station, bracing his boot against the breech of the F-34 cannon. His tunic has darkened with sweat, clinging to his back like a second skin. He feels no heroic surge. He feels only the smell of overheated machine oil, diesel, and the sour funk of unwashed bodies. A high-pitched ringing fills his ears, the result of constant pressure changes. Vasily looks at the breech block. The massive steel wedge, which should slide easily and smoothly, has frozen in a half-open position. Again. He jerks the extractor handle. Metal grates against metal, a dry, nasty sound like styrofoam on glass. The wedge doesn't move. Carbon deposits, mixed with dust and factory grease thickened by the heat, have turned into an abrasive glue. Stuck again. Vasily's voice sounds hollow, his vocal cords parched. It isn't a question. It is a statement of fact. Nearby in the driver's hatch, the company technician is shifting around. He has the tired, sallow face of a man who hasn't slept in 3 days. He wipes his hands with a rag that is dirtier than the dirt itself. "What did you expect, Commander?" The technician spits thick saliva onto the scorching floor. The spit hisses and evaporates instantly. "Physics. The tolerances are gone. The metal is expanding. Your breech block is bloated like a drowned man." Vasily wipes his face with his sleeve. Black streaks of soot remain on the fabric. "Physics will kill me faster than the Germans," he snaps. 4 rounds a minute. 4. That's per the manual, on the proving ground, with a breeze blowing and targets that don't shoot back. But here? He slaps the breech with his palm. Here, after the 3rd shell, the casing jams. The extractor rips the rim, and we sit there with a ramrod like idiots, knocking the casing out through the barrel while they zero in on us. Do you understand what that means? The technician is silent. He knows what it means. He knows the tactical and technical specs just as well as the crew. The German Tigers and Panthers, already warming up their engines over the horizon, are equipped with magnificent optics and long-barreled guns. They start effectively hitting targets from a distance of 1,500 to 2,000 meters. The Soviet T-34, with its 76mm cannon model 1940, is powerless at that range. Its shells simply scratch the Krupp steel, leaving mere marks. To penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor, Vasily needs to get within pistol shot range, 500 meters, or better yet, 300. This is the death zone. The tank must cross the space between 1,500 and 500 meters under withering fire. And in that moment, When every second equals a life, rate of fire becomes the only chance for survival. The German fires 8 times a minute, Vasily continues, looking the technician in the eye. They have room in the turret, the ventilation works, the loader stands full height. But my Stepan is bent over double. The shell weighs nearly 14 pounds. Doesn't seem like much, but try tossing those hunks of iron in this heat when the air is scorched and there's no oxygen. And on top of that, the breech jams. For us to survive, we need to fire not 4 times. We need to fire 8, 10. We have to flood them with fire, blind them, force them to take cover while we close the distance.
If I put out 4 shots, I'll burn on the first kilometer.
The technician throws up his hands, a gesture of helplessness. I'm not a wizard, Vasya. I can't recast the cannon. Steel is steel. The bore narrows from the heat, the casing expands, the lubricant burns off. It's the design limit. The machine isn't calculated for this tempo at this temperature. Be thankful the engine isn't boiling. Vasily turns away. He looks at the ammo rack. The shells lie in crates on the floor, covered in a thin layer of rusty step dust. Each shell is a chance, but that chance has to be realized in time. He mentally runs through the loader's algorithm. Bend down, open the crate lock, yank out the sweat-slicked shell, turn in the cramped turret without hitting the commander, ram it into the breech. It takes seconds. Precious seconds that leak away like blood from a severed artery. And if the shell doesn't fit, if the breech doesn't close all the way, then the algorithm breaks. A pause ensues, and in that pause, 88 millimeters of death arrives. Design limit, Vasily repeats through clenched teeth. Do we have a limit? The crew? He sees his loader, Stepan, sleeping outside in the shade of the tracks. Stepan's hands are raw and bloody, his fingernails black with grease. Yesterday, during practice fire, he almost dropped a shell on his foot. Muscles get clogged with lactic acid, coordination drops. In combat, when adrenaline and fear are added, he'll start making mistakes even faster. Fatigue is just as much an enemy as an armor-piercing shell. Silence hangs in the tank, broken only by the ticking of cooling, yet still hot metal. Somewhere far away to the west, a rumble is audible, a low, vibrating sound that shakes the earth. They are coming, the Armada. Hundreds of tons of perfectly fitted, lethal metal, operated by well-fed, methodical crews. They are coming to kill. And they don't have problems with jammed breeches. Vasily runs a finger along the breech block. Soot has eaten into the pores of the metal. An engineering dead end. Designers in offices drew blueprints. Workers in evacuation assembled the machine. But none of them sat here, in 120-degree heat, trying to force this mechanism to work faster than the laws of physics allow. There has to be a way, Vasily says, more to himself than to the technician. We can't just drive out and burn. That's not work. That's slaughter. Standard lubricant is gun grease, the technician mumbles, packing his tools. But it flows at 100 degrees, and your barrel heats up to nearly 600. It just evaporates, leaving carbon. Dry friction, brother. You can't fight it. Try pouring more oil, maybe that will help. Tried it. Vasily cuts him off. It burns. The smoke is so bad you can't open your eyes. Carbon monoxide builds up. The crew starts vomiting right on the ammo rack. The technician climbs out of the hatch, squinting at the bright sun. Well, then pray, Commander. I can't help you with anything else. The tools are in order, the mechanisms are within tolerances. The rest is war. Vasily is left alone. He sits in the gloom of the turret, feeling the white-hot armor pressing down on his shoulders. The sensation of a trap. The T-34 tank, legendary machine, pride of the industry, now seems to him a coffin.
A coffin whose lid they must slam shut from the inside with their own hands. Tomorrow, or perhaps by this evening, hell will begin. And in this hell, he will have to modify this working tool with a file, breaking the back not only of the enemy, but of his own machine. He must force it to shoot despite the resistance of the material. Otherwise, they are all dead men who simply haven't been issued their death notices yet.
In the evening of the same day, reconnaissance led the crew to the edge of a shattered village. The landmark on the map was listed as Hill with Church, but of the hill only craters remained, and of the church, the skeleton of a bell tower and 2.5 spans of brickwork. The walls were scarred by shrapnel so densely that the brick resembled a sponge. Inside, it smelled not of incense, but of stale dampness, lime, and mouse droppings. War had weathered the holiness out of here, leaving only the geometry of thick walls capable of withstanding a mortar hit. Vasily steps over a pile of broken brick. Grit crunches under his boots. The crew is seeking not spiritual comfort, but material resources. Rags, boards, anything that burns or might be useful. In the corner, under a collapsed vault, the commander notices crates. Not green army ones, but plain wooden ones, nailed together roughly, practically. He knocks the lid off with the stock of his submachine gun. Inside is a dull yellow gleam. Church candles. Dozens of pounds of wax, neatly stacked in rows. Next to them, in a wicker-covered demijohn, a dark liquid. Lamp oil. Vasily dips a finger into the bottle, rubs the oily film. The liquid is thick, viscous, smelling sweet and cloying. A shutter clicks in his memory. The image surfaces instantly, sharp and clear, devoid of sentimentality. Grandfather. The carpentry workshop. Shavings on the earthen floor. Grandfather greasing the wagon axles before a long journey. He doesn't use tar, which dries out quickly in the heat. He melts something in a tin can over a fire. Wax, Vaska. It holds the heat. The creaky voice sounds in his ears as clearly as if his grandfather were standing right there. Fat will run off like water, but wax rubs into the metal. It'll slide forever. Vasily looks at his hands, black with grease, then at the yellow wax. It is an engineering solution born of despair. The standard gun lubricant is a standard calculated for average conditions. But here, in this step oven, standards don't work. They need a substance that won't evaporate on a scorching breach, won't turn into carbon, but will create a slippery film between the steel of the casing and the steel of the barrel. Stepan! The commander's voice bounces off the remnants of the dome. Bring a casing, an empty one, and give me a bucket. We're going to do some chemistry. Night descends on the steppe like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The crew lights a fire in a small ravine, shielded from German observers by the hull of the tank. The fire licks the bottom of a brass 76mm shell casing, adapted as a crucible. Vasily crumbles candles into it. The wax melts reluctantly, turning into a golden puddle. Stepan, the loader, squats nearby. His face, lit from below by the flame, looks carved from stone. He watches the brew with distrust. For him, the manual is law, and what the commander is doing is amateurism bordering on sabotage. Comrade Commander, Stepan mumbles, tossing a wood chip into the fire. If the political officer sees us shoving church goods into the cannon, it'll be a tribunal. They'll say it's obscurantism. There'll be a tribunal if you burn tomorrow along with the tank because a casing jammed. Vasily cuts him off, not looking up from the process. Pour the oil. Slowly. He commands like an alchemist seeking the formula for immortality. The oil mixes with the molten wax. The mixture begins to bubble, changing color from amber to cloudy beige. The smell is strange. a mix of burning diesel fumes soaked into the tanker's clothes and the heavy ecclesiastical aroma of hot wax. The smell of peace and the smell of war merge at a single point. Vasily stirs the brew with a whittled stick. The consistency must be right. Not water, but not a solid block. They need a paste.
A lubricant that will withstand 500 degrees. A lubricant that will allow metal to slide on metal with zero resistance. When the mixture cools slightly, thickening to the state of soft margarine, Vasily takes the first shell. Armor-piercing. 14 pounds of blunt death. He scoops up the warm, greasy mass with his fingers and begins to rub the steel casing. His movements are confident, strong. He doesn't just smear it, he rubs the wax into the micropores of the metal. "Thin layer, Stepa," he instructs, passing the shell to the loader. "Put on too much and there'll be carbon buildup. The casing needs to be like soap, slippery but dry to the touch. Understand?" Stepan takes the shell. He feels the difference. The rough, factory steel of the casing becomes smooth, almost silky under the layer of wax mastic. He tries running a finger along it. The finger glides without meeting resistance. "Like on ice," the loader exhales in surprise. They work in silence. The rhythm of the work is soothing. Take a shell from the crate, wipe the dust off with a rag, apply the mixture, rub it in, put it back. Shell after shell. 10, 20, 30. The ammo rack turns into a neat woodpile where every cartridge has been hand-processed. It is a violation of all instructions. The small arms manuals clearly state ammunition must be dry and clean. Lubricant on the casing is forbidden, as it increases pressure on the breech block during firing. But Vasily knows another rule, an unwritten one. It is better to risk blowing the breech than to die with an intact cannon that won't shoot. He is consciously going for metal overload. He is changing the conditions of the problem. If the breech won't open from standard recoil, we will force the casing to fly out on its own. By 3 in the morning, the work is finished. Vasily's hands are covered up to the elbows in hardened wax and oil. The skin shines. He feels a strange calm. The fear of tomorrow has receded, displaced by fatigue and the sense of duty fulfilled toward the mechanism. He did everything he could. He gave the machine a chance. Now everything depends on Stepan and physics. They sit by the dying fire. Around them is darkness, filled with the sounds of a frontline night, distant flares, the drone of engines, rare machine gun bursts. But here, in the small circle of light, it smells like an apiary. It smells like home. "Think it'll help?" Stepan asks, wiping his hands on his pants. There is no skepticism in his voice anymore, only hope. He wants to believe that this yellow ointment will save his life. Vasily looks at the turret of their T-34. The silhouette of the tank is black and angular against the starry sky. It is a pile of iron created to kill and be killed. But now, inside it lies ammunition modified by human ingenuity. "Mechanics don't lie," Vasily answers. "Friction is the enemy. We removed it. We'll check tomorrow." "Go to sleep, Stepa. We'll need fresh hands tomorrow." He puts out the fire. The coals hiss. The smell of wax hits the nostrils one last time before dissolving into the smell of dust and gasoline. This night was a respite, a lab session before the exam that the German Tigers will proctor. And the grade on this exam is life or death. Vasily closes his eyes, but before his inner gaze stands not the face of his wife or mother, but the shiny, slippery surface of a casing that must, simply must, fly into the breach in a split second. Tomorrow, the war begins for real. July 5th, 1943. 4 in the morning. The sun has not yet appeared, but the sky in the east is already swelling with the color of clotted blood. The steppe is grey, hushed. It is the deceptive silence before the storm. Inside the tank, it is cool, as much as is possible in a steel box that heats up to an oven state during the day. But now the metal has cooled. It is just cold and damp with condensation. The crew is not sleeping. Vasily Zhigun sits at the sight, peering into the gray haze. His eyes are inflamed from lack of sleep and constant tension. He checks the aiming mechanisms. The flywheels turn stiffly. The grease has thickened overnight. Nearby, Stepan breathes. The loader sits on his haunches, hugging his knees. He looks at the ammo rack. There, in the gloom, the bottoms of the casings gleam dully, covered in a strange matte film. The mixture of wax and oil has set, turning into something like a paraffin skin. "They're coming!" The mechanic's voice in the intercom sounds flat, emotionless. Vasily presses against the eyepieces. Through the morning mist, silhouettes emerge. Square, angular boxes. This isn't the main force, it's a reconnaissance in force. A lone German Panzer IV crawls along the slope of the ravine, carefully feeling the dry earth with its tracks. Range, 800 meters. For the German gun, this is already working distance. For the Soviet T-34, it is the limit of effective fire. "Armor piercing," Vasily commands. His voice is calm, but inside everything coils into a spring. Now the exam begins. Not on knowledge of the manual, but on the survival of engineering wit. Stepan bolts from his spot. His movements are practiced to automatism, but fear seeps through them. Fear not of the enemy, but of his own weapon. He remembers yesterday. He remembers how the casing jammed, how they had to hammer it out with a ramrod while seconds ticked off a death sentence. Stepan snatches a shell from the rack. His hands feel an unfamiliar texture. Not cold, rough steel, but something smooth, greasy, warm. Wax lubricant. The shell, weighing over 13 pounds, seems lighter. The loader turns and shoves it into the breech. Usually at this moment, a grinding sound is heard. Metal catches on metal. The casing goes in tight, requiring a blow of the fist on the base so the breech wedge can rise. But now the impossible happens. The shell flies into the barrel with a soft, moist smack, like a piston into a lubricated cylinder. Thump. The clang of the breech sounds different. It isn't dry and ringing, but dull, solid. The wedge rises instantly, without delay, without the slightest resistance. Contacts close. The gun is ready for battle faster than the brain has time to realize it. "Fire!" Vasily screams and hits the trigger. The tank shudders. Barrel recoil, the sharp smell of burnt powder, and immediately, the ringing strike of metal on the floor. The extractor has ejected the spent casing. It didn't stick. It flew out, smoking and spinning, like it was scalded. Its walls are covered in soot, but the wax, melting at the moment of the shot, worked as an ideal gasket. The gases didn't bloat the metal to a critical jam. The lubricant took the hit, burning off, but allowing the steel to slide. Inside the turret, a smell hangs in the air. It isn't just powder fumes. It is the sweetish, church-like smell of hot wax, mixed with the heavy spirit of red-hot iron. A strange, surreal aroma in the center of a killing machine. "It works," Stepan whispers, looking at the empty breech. "Don't sleep!" Vasily's roar brings him back to reality. "Tempo! Give me the next one!" The German tank in the sight begins to turn its turret. He noticed the flash. He has about 4 seconds to catch the Soviet tank in his crosshairs. Usually, reloading a T-34 takes 10 to 12 seconds if working carefully, and 8 seconds if tearing veins. The German knows these standards. He isn't hurrying. He is confident in his superiority. But Stepan is already hauling the second shell. The fear is gone. Surprise and excitement remain. The shell slides in his hands but doesn't fall.
The wax gives grip to skin but slides perfectly on steel. Zip, smack, clank. Breech closed. Fire! The second casing falls to the floor, ringing against the first. 2 seconds for the shot. 3 seconds for reloading. A 5-second cycle. It is incredible. It is beyond the technical specifications. It is the rhythm of an automatic weapon, not a 76mm tank gun. The German tank doesn't have time to finish turning its turret. The second shell hits its track, shattering the links. The machine jerks and freezes, exposing its flank. An ideal target. Finish him! Vasily spins the flywheel, correcting the aim. Armor piercing! Stepan enters the rhythm. His body turns into a feed mechanism. Bend, jerk, turn, ram. No fist strikes, no delays. The lubricant works. The casings fly out like from a machine gun. The third shell goes into the barrel. Third shot. 20 seconds. Only 20 seconds have passed since the first command. In this time, a standard crew would have managed 1.5, maybe 2 shots, accounting for nerves and a stiff breech. Vasily's crew made 3. The third shell punches through the side of the German Panzer IV in the engine compartment area. A flash. Black, greasy smoke instantly envelops the enemy machine. The ammunition detonates a second later, blowing the turret off the ring. Silence returns as suddenly as it vanished. Only the ringing in ears and the hissing of hot oil. A thick fog stands in the fighting compartment. The fan on the turret roof hums, trying to pull out the powder gases, but it can't cope with such a rate of fire. Eyes burn. There is nothing to breathe, but the crew is smiling. Vasily turns to Stepan. The loader stands leaning his hand on the breech. His chest is heaving, sweat mixed with soot runs down his face, but in his eyes is a wild, primal delight. He looks at his hands covered in a layer of wax and carbon.
3 and 20, Commander,
Stepan wheezes.
3 and 20. We got them.
Vasily nods. He looks at the breech block. The metal has turned blue from the heat. Heat radiates from it. But the mechanism works. Church chemistry, mixed in a dirty bucket in the middle of the steppe, defeated the German engineering school. Wax that should have burned in icon lamps, burned in the barrel bore, saving 3 Russian lives. But Vasily knows, this is only the beginning. That was one machine, a scout. Hundreds will come after it. And there, in the real battle, the rhythm will be even harsher. The lubricant works, but physiology works too. Stepan is breathing heavily, as if he ran a marathon. 3 shells mean 40 pounds of iron that had to be tossed in 20 seconds in cramped, stuffy quarters. What if the battle lasts an hour? What if 50 shells are needed? Ventilate, Vasily commands, opening the hatch. Morning air bursts into the turret, seeming icy compared to the atmosphere inside. He looks at the smoking carcass of the German tank. A victory of technique over technique. A victory of lubricant over friction. But the main resource isn't wax or steel. The main resource is Stepan's muscles. And that resource is not infinite. The lubricant allows the mechanism to work faster, but it forces the man to work himself to exhaustion. The conveyor belt is running, and it will demand not just oil, but blood. By noon, the wind changed. If in the morning the steppe breathed heat, Now it began to spit. From the south, from the direction of the German positions, a ground storm began. It wasn't sand in the usual sense. It was loess, fine, flour-like dust that rises into the air from the slightest vibration of the soil. And the soil shook continuously. Thousands of tracks and hundreds of explosions ground the dry black earth into gray powder.
The wind drove this suspension toward the Soviet positions. The dust penetrated everywhere. It gritted on teeth, clogged nostrils, settled in a dense gray layer on observation instruments, making periscopes cloudy in minutes. But the most terrible thing happened not outside, but inside the ammo rack. Vasily Zhigun was the first to sense something was wrong when he ran his hand over the breech. The metal was rough. The thin film of oil that had saved the mechanism an hour ago was now working like a magnet. Dust flying in through the vision slits and ventilation settled on the grease, turning it into a thick, dirty paste. "Dust," Vasily dropped shortly, not looking up from the panorama. "Close hatches tight." But the airtightness of a T-34 tank is a relative concept. Dust hung in the air inside the turret, illuminated by thin rays of sun breaking through the cracks. It settled on the shells. On those very shells the crew had spent all night rubbing with wax and oil. The invention that seemed like salvation in the morning turned into a trap.
Sticky wax, working perfectly in cleanliness, now became a base for an abrasive. Each casing lying in the crate was covered with a fur coat of gray dust. "Target right, 12 o'clock!" The commander's voice broke into a scream. Through the murky veil of the dust storm, the silhouette of a Stug self-propelled gun emerged. A low, squat machine, almost invisible in the folds of the terrain. It surfaced from the dust cloud like a predatory fish. Range, 600 meters. Lethal. "Armor-piercing! Tempo!" Stepan lunged for the ammo rack. His hands habitually grabbed a shell, but instead of smooth sliding, he felt sandpaper under his fingers. The dust had eaten into the wax solidly. No time to clean it. A second of delay means death. He turns and shoves the shell into the breech. The shell goes, but doesn't fly. Halfway in, it stops. Stuck.
The dust paste mixed with wax clogged the gap between the casing and the chamber walls. Friction increased manifold.
"Won't go!" Stepan yells, leaning with all his weight in panic. Vasily turns around. He sees a terrible picture. The shell sticking out of the breech 4 inches from being seated. The breech can't be closed. Can't fire. And the German SPG is already turning its hull. "Hit it!" Vasily roars. "Hammer it in!" This is a violation of everything. Hitting the primer or base of a shell is madness. But right now, madness is in action. Stepan, his face twisted with exertion, clenches his fist. It is not a human hand. It is a hammer. He punches the wide base of the casing. Once. The shell advances a millimeter. Twice. Knuckles burst, skin peels off, leaving bloody prints on the brass. 3 times. A blow of despair. The shell enters the breech with a crunch, scraping off a layer of wax and dirt. The breech wedge clangs, rising up. "Fire!" The tank jerks.
The casing flies out, but the extractor struggles to rip it from the barrel. It falls to the floor, smoking, black, covered in a baked crust of dirt. But they lost time. 4 seconds. 4 extra seconds to hammer the shell in with a fist. At that moment, the world flips over. A blow of terrible force shakes the turret. The sound is as if you are sitting inside a huge bell that has been struck by a sledgehammer weighing a ton. A German shell grazed the cheek of the turret. A ricochet. The armor held, but the kinetic energy of the impact didn't go anywhere. It went inside.
Vasily is thrown onto the sight. He hits his head on the eyepiece. The light in his eyes goes out for a moment, replaced by red circles. Cottony silence fills his ears, through which a thin, mosquito-like squeal breaks through. Eardrums or vessels have burst from the pressure change. On the inner side of the armor, at the point of impact, metal fragments fly off, spalling.
Fine shrapnel lashes the radio man's face. The tank smells of ozone and blood. Vasily shakes his head, trying to regain his vision. He sees Stepan. The loader is sitting on the floor, clutching his right hand to his chest. His fingers are unnaturally twisted. The knuckles have turned into a bloody mess. Blood drips onto the dirty floor, mixing with the dust. But Stepan is alive. He looks at the commander with wild, white eyes on a black face.
Alive?
Vasily's lips move, but he doesn't hear his own voice. Stepan nods. He tries to stand up, grabbing the breech with his left hand. The German Stug, having lost the target in the dust cloud after the shot, backs up. It took a hit too. The Soviet shell knocked off its track but didn't penetrate the armor. The battle ended in a draw, a technical draw that cost the crew their health. Vasily looks at the next shell in the rack. It is just as dirty, sticky. The wax gathered all the steppe dirt onto itself. The chemistry that worked in the laboratory of night silence lost the war to the real environment. There is no sterility in the steppe. Here there is only dust that penetrates the very structure of war. The commander takes a rag and furiously wipes the grease from the warhead.
Enough,
he wheezes. His voice returns but sounds like it's coming from a barrel.
Wax is death. In the dust it works like glue. We cemented our own gun.
He raises his eyes to Stepan. The loader, overcoming pain, kneads his broken fingers.
What do we do, Commander?
He asks.
Dry casing won't go. Greased one jams from the dirt. Dead end.
Vasily looks at the crates, at the narrow space of the turret, at his friend's bloody hand. The problem isn't just friction. The problem is feed speed and cleanliness. They need the shell to get into the breach, bypassing contact with dirty air and dirty hands. They need to eliminate the human factor at the crate-to-barrel stage.
Remove the wax, Vasily commands. All of it. Scrape it off with a knife, teeth, whatever you want. We leave clean metal.
It'll jam,
the radio man objects, wiping blood from his cheek.
It won't jam if we change the feed.
Vasily's eyes narrow. He sees a solution. Not chemical, mechanical. He looks at an empty wooden shell crate. Boards, nails.
Got axle grease? He asks.
A can in reserves, the mechanic nods. Thick as clay.
Bring it, and break the crates. We're going to build.
They are alive, but concussed. The ringing in their heads won't go away. But fear has receded before a new task. The invention failed the crash test, so a new one is needed. Cruder, more primitive, one that doesn't give a damn about dust. Vasily understands. Fine adjustments don't work here. A sledgehammer-level solution is needed. The tank stands in a cloud of settling dust. Inside, work is boiling again. Now they are fighting not with barrel friction, but with the geometry of space and time. The night before the main German strike is deaf and sticky. There is no coolness in it, only cooling humidity. The crew doesn't sleep. Sleep is an unaffordable luxury when your life depends on the coefficient of friction. Inside the tank, a dim bulb burns, picking out tired faces smeared with soot from the darkness. They are scraping off wax. Yesterday's miracle weapon is today a death sentence. With knives, pieces of hacksaw blades, fingernails, they tear the mixture of paraffin and steppe dust off the casings. Vasily Zhigun sits in the commander's seat and watches Stepan. The loader moves like a broken doll. He bends down to the ammo rack on the floor, grabs a heavy 13-pound shell, violently straightens his back, turns in the cramp, and shoves the slug into the breech. Vasily counts seconds. Bend, 1. Grab, 2. Lift and turn, 3. Ram, 4. 4 seconds. 4 seconds of unprotected time when the tank is blind and unarmed. In these 4 seconds, the German gunner has time to inhale, exhale, and smoothly press the trigger. 4 seconds is an eternity. It is the distance between life and a mass grave. Stepan's fatigue is not just human weakness. It is a technical failure in the gun's feeding system. By morning, after the 10th shell, 4 seconds will turn into 6. After the 20th, into 8. And then he will simply fall, and the gun will fall silent. "Won't work." Vasily's voice sounds hard as a hammer blow. "We won't make it. Physics will eat us alive. We need to remove unnecessary movements." He looks around. His gaze rests on an empty shell crate. Rough pine boards held together by nails. The garbage of war. Firewood. But Vasily doesn't see firewood. He sees geometry. A straight line is always shorter than a curved one. "Break the crates," he commands. Stepan raises a cloudy gaze. "Why, Commander?"
Can't have a fire.
"Break them!" Zhigun barks.
Knock out the bottoms, keep the sides. We're going to build.
For the next half hour, the inside of the fighting compartment transforms from a combat vehicle into a carpentry shop. Wood cracks. Nails screech as they are ripped out. Vasily measures the distance from the main ammo rack to the breech. The distance is small, only half a meter in a straight line, but this half meter is the hardest. Using 2 long boards and debris from a crate, they nail together a crude, primitive chute, a trough, an inclined guide. The construction is ugly, held together by a prayer and bent nails. One end rests on the ammo crates on the floor, the other is angled up toward the breech, just below the level of the breech wedge. "Give me the grease." Vasily holds out his hand. The driver pulls a can from the emergency supply, a tin container with thick, dark brown lubricant.
It is calcium grease, coarse, smelly, intended for the chassis, for road wheels that churn mud. It holds temperature worse than wax, but it is greasy. It is incredibly slippery. And there is a lot of it. Vasily scoops up the grease by the handful. He thickly, unsparingly smears the wooden chute. The boards greedily drink the fat, becoming dark and glossy. The smell in the tank changes. Now it smells not of church, but of a train depot. The heavy petroleum smell of railway grease overpowers the smell of sweat. "Now watch." Vasily turns to the radio man, Grisha. "Get out of your corner. You're no longer a gunner. Forget the machine gun." Grisha, a frail kid, looks on with misunderstanding. His assigned station is below, to the right of the mechanic. His task is comms and the hull machine gun. "But who will listen to the airwaves?" he asks timidly. "The airwaves won't help us when a slug flies in," Vasily cuts him off. "Stand right here, by the rack." Your task is to take a shell and put it on the chute. Just put it. Don't lift, don't spin. Took, placed. That's it. You are the feed mechanism. Vasily shifts his gaze to Stepan. "And you, Stepa, stand by the breech. You don't need to dive down anymore. The shell will come to you itself. Your task is to catch it off the chute and drive it into the barrel. You are the rammer. Understood?" They try it. Grisha, bent double in the tight space, snatches a shell from the box. He doesn't spend strength lifting. He simply transfers the weight onto the oiled boards of the chute. The shell touches the wood. Shoosh! The heavy steel slug slides along the thick layer of grease, like on ice. It flies that half-meter in a fraction of a second, gaining momentum. Stepan stands by the breach. He doesn't need to bend down. The shell jumps into his hands on its own, already at barrel level. Slap. Ram. "Stop!" Vasily commands. "Time?" He looks at the second hand of a captured watch. 2 seconds. 2 seconds per cycle. They cut the reload time in half. They removed the heaviest part of the work from the equation, lifting the load with the back. Now, gravity and sliding are working. "Again!" Zhigun commands. "Tempo!" Grisha throws. The shell slides with a rustling sound, leaving a furrow in the grease. Stepan catches. Impact. Breach. The turret becomes cramped. The chute gets in the way of movement. It blocks the passage. It scratches legs. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that a conveyor belt has emerged inside the tank. The fighting compartment of the T-34 has ceased to be just a cabin. It has turned into a factory floor. There is no place for the heroism of a loner here anymore. Here, there is division of labor. One supplies the raw material, the second processes it, the third controls the process. Vasily looks at this strange, ugly mechanism. Shell crates, nails, axle grease. No high engineering. It is a Stone Age solution, but applied in the age of motors. He takes the can of grease and smears the guides even thicker. "Grease it heavier," he tells Grisha. "The wood drinks it. If it dries out, we stall." Grease drips onto the floor. The floor becomes slippery. Standing is hard. Feet slide apart. But the shells fly. They aren't just being carried anymore. They flow in a stream. "Logistics." Vasily mutters a word he heard from the regimental engineer. "We established logistics inside a single tank." He understands that tomorrow, this will save their lives. Or kill them. Because at such a firing speed, casings will pile up on the floor in a mountain. Nowhere to put them. The hatch for ejecting casings is small, and opening it in battle is suicide. That means they will be standing knee-deep in hot metal. "Grisha," Vasily adds, "when there's a pause, kick the casings into the corner. Otherwise we'll boil in here like crawfish." The tank froze in anticipation of dawn. Inside smells of damp wood and oil. In the middle of the turret sticks a ridiculous wooden slide, gleaming with grease. The crew sits at their stations, mentally testing the new rhythm. Their bodies are now parts of a single organism. Grisha, the hands. Stepan, the back and shoulders. Vasily, the brain and eyes. They hacked the system. They violated the manual, the operating instructions, and common sense. They turned the tank into a conveyor belt of death. Tomorrow this conveyor will be launched at full capacity, and it will demand not only shells, it will demand the ultimate strain of human sinews. Vasily checks the breech. It moves easily. Grease got in there too. Let it smoke. Let it stink. As long as it doesn't jam. Dawn is close. The earth begins to tremble barely noticeably. German motors are coming. The armada has woken up, but the Russian conveyor is ready for work too. Lieutenant Kravtsov appeared at the revetment an hour after the crew finished the installation. He was new. Everything about him was new. The creaking belt, the tunic not yet faded by the sun, the map case with a clear celluloid insert. He smelled not of diesel and sweat, but of cheap cologne and the printer's ink of fresh manuals. Just out of the academy yesterday. In his head, war was a diagram drawn with blue and red arrows, where tanks move according to standards and crews execute orders with the precision of a metronome.
He jumped onto the armor of the T-34 lightly, athletically. Vasily Zhigun, wiping his hands with an oily rag, slowly raised his head. He had seen this type of officer hundreds of times. Theorists. They know the tactical and technical specs by heart, but don't know what burnt human meat smells like inside a turret. "Report readiness," Kravtsov's voice rang out. He wanted to show authority. He wanted to be a commander. Vasily silently moved over, letting the platoon leader to the hatch. Kravtsov looked inside and froze.
What he saw didn't fit into any diagram. The fighting compartment of the tank, the Holy of Holies, had been turned into a cross between a sawmill and a depot. In the middle of the turret, blocking access to the ammo rack, stuck a crude wooden construction, an inclined chute hammered together from rotting boards. It was thickly, richly smeared with axle grease. Brown lubricant dripped onto the floor, forming puddles. The shells weren't in crates, but were piled in a heap at the base of this chute, also smeared with sticky sludge. The lieutenant's face went blotchy red. He climbed inside, nearly slipping on the grease. "What is this?" he asked quietly, with a hiss, poking a finger at the wooden tray. "I'm asking, what is this, Sergeant Major?" "Feed accelerator, Comrade Lieutenant," Vasily answered calmly. He didn't stand at attention. The tank is too tight for drill. "Accelerator?" Kravtsov broke into a shout. "This is a court-martial! What have you set up here, you tinkerers?"
You've turned a combat vehicle into a flammable shed.
The lieutenant grabbed the side of the wooden chute. The board cracked. "Wood in the fighting compartment, axle grease, open combustion source." Kravtsov was choking with indignation. "The operating manual categorically forbids the presence of foreign combustible objects. If a cumulative jet or even shrapnel hits, all this will flare up like a match. You'll burn in a second. You're a suicide squad." He was right. Absolutely crystal clear right. From the point of view of the manual and safety regulations, what Vasily did was a crime. Axle grease is a petroleum product. Wood is kindling. In case of armor penetration, the temperature inside will jump to 1,000 degrees. This chute will turn the tank into a crematorium instantly. "Remove it!" Kravtsov screamed, spraying spit. "Dismantle immediately! Scrub everything of oil! Return the ammo rack to standard configuration. I will check in 20 minutes. If you don't remove it, I'll put you on trial for sabotage." Radioman Grisha pressed into the corner, looking fearfully at the officer. Stepan stared gloomily at the floor, clenching his fist. Only Vasily remained calm. His calm was heavy, like a tank track. "I won't remove it," he said. Silence hung in the turret, so dense it seemed you could cut it with a knife. Kravtsov was taken aback. He expected excuses, fear, fuss, but he heard a direct refusal. Mutiny. "What did you say?" the lieutenant whispered, grabbing his holster. "Do you understand what you are saying to a superior officer? In wartime conditions..." "In wartime conditions," Vasily interrupted him, taking a step forward and looming over the frail officer. "We live 3 minutes. That is a statistic, Lieutenant. 3 minutes of combat." Vasily spoke not loudly, but every word fell like a casing to the floor. "You studied the manual in a classroom. I burned in this box twice. You talk about fire? Yes, we might burn, but if we don't shoot like a machine gun, we will burn guaranteed. The Germans won't wait while Stepan gets a shell according to the manual, wipes it with a rag and prays. Their Tigers hit from 2 kilometers, and we have to get to 500 meters. Vasily poked a finger toward the vision slit, where beyond the horizon German engines were already roaring. Out there, Lieutenant, isn't a textbook. Out there are 16 German guns against our 3 tanks. If I shoot 4 times a minute, as required, they'll kill me in the second minute. And they'll kill you. And they'll lay down your whole platoon. This chute gives us 8 shots. 8! That's twice the chance that we'll take someone with us. Kravtsov stood blinking in confusion. His book truth collided with trench truth. The logic of safety smashed against the logic of survival. He saw before him not a subordinate, but a man who had already stepped across the line of fear.
Vasily looked at him with the gaze of a dead man who had been given a deferment.
"You'll burn," Kravtsov repeated uncertainly. "It's grease. Fumes." "We'll burn anyway," Vasily smirked harshly. "A tank is iron, and the crew is meat. The meat's job is to force the iron to work to the end. The manual won't save us, Comrade Lieutenant. Speed will save us. If we manage to empty the ammo load before we get hit, we won. And if we worry about fire, we'll all lie here." Kravtsov looked over the filthy tankers. He saw their hands, scraped with ingrained dirt. He saw Stepan's eyes, red from insomnia. He smelled the fear they tried to mask with the smell of grease. The lieutenant slowly removed his hand from his holster. He realized his authority ended here, inside this steel cave. Different laws operated here, laws of mechanics and death. "On your responsibility," he dropped hollowly, averting his eyes. "If the Commission sees—" "The Commission won't climb in here," Vasily cut him off. "And tomorrow either we ride this firewood to Berlin, or you bury us in this same firewood. Consider it our coffin, and we arrange our coffin however is convenient for us." Kravtsov turned and climbed toward the hatch. His back was straight, but his shoulders slumped. He was leaving, taking with him his correct, clean, regulation war, leaving the crew alone with their dirty, incorrect reality. He climbed out, gulped fresh air, trying to purge the smell of grease from his lungs. He knew he should report, should stop this madness. But he also knew that in an hour, hell would begin. And in this hell, he, Lieutenant Kravtsov, might have to pray to that cursed wooden chute. Vasily watched the officer's legs disappearing into the hatch opening. "Back to work," he commanded, not changing his tone. "Grisha, check the incline."
Looks like the lieutenant shifted it.
The crew returned to their interrupted task. The conflict of 2 truths ended with the victory of practice. Theory retreated, insulted and humiliated, but not defeated. It waited for its hour, waited for the first spark. Vasily understood. The lieutenant was right. The risk of fire grew 1,000-fold. One tracer bullet, one red-hot shard flying into the hatch, and the oiled boards would flare up like a torch. They were sitting on a powder keg smeared in fat. But there was no choice. Between the probability of burning from a random spark and guaranteed death from a German AP shell due to slow reloading, Vasily chose the risk. It was an all-in bet. "Stepa," he called quietly. "If we catch fire—" "I know," the loader nodded, checking the slide of a shell on the wood. "Don't open hatches. Gas to the floor, and crush them while the tracks are turning." The conversation was over. Words no longer had meaning. Only metal, wood, grease, and the wait for the red flare signal remained. The sun slowly rose above the horizon, illuminating the polygon of death. The southern face of the Kursk salient prepared to accept a sacrifice, and the crew of T-34 number 212 was ready to make that sacrifice. Not by the manual, by conscience. Dawn on July 6, 1943, brought no coolness. The sun rose in a crimson haze, backlighting silhouettes on the horizon. There were 16 of them. 16 heavy German machines, tigers with their characteristic overlapping road wheels and angular panthers. Against them, in revetments, stood 3 Soviet T-34s. The math of death was simple. More than 5 Germans per 1 Russian gun. Vasily Zhigun glued himself to the sight. Range, 1,200 meters. For the 76 caliber, this is beyond the limit. The shell will simply graze the tiger's frontal armor and ricochet. Need to let them closer.
Need to wait until the gray boxes fill the entire field of view.
The Germans came confidently. They knew their frontal armor was impenetrable from this distance. They walked as if on parade, only occasionally stopping to fire. 800 meters. 700. 600. "Start!" Vasily exhaled. This order launched not just a battle. It launched a conveyor belt. Radioman Grisha, now standing in the unfamiliar role of feeder, grabbed a shell from the rack. His hands trembled, but his movements were precise. He didn't lift the weight to his chest. He simply transferred the shell onto the wooden tray, thickly smeared with grease. The heavy steel slug touched the oiled boards. Shoosh. The sound was soft, hissing. The shell, obeying gravity and lubricant, slid down toward the breach. It flew half a meter in a fraction of a second, picking up speed. Stepan was already waiting for it. He didn't have to dive down, breaking his back. The shell jumped into his hands at the perfect height. Turn, push. The shell, also lubricated by residual grease from the tray, flew into the chamber. The breech clanged shut. Fire! The tank jerked. The casing flew out, smoking, and fell with a ring underfoot. Grisha was already throwing the next one. Shush! Stepan catches. Clang! Fire! The rate of fire turned into madness. Usually 10-15 seconds pass between shots. The crew catches their breath, the gunner refines the target, the loader fights fatigue. But here there were no pauses. The wooden chute eliminated unnecessary movements from the equation. Shells flowed like a river. 3 minutes into the battle, it became impossible to breathe in the turret. The fan hummed strainingly, but it couldn't cope with powder gases from 8 shots a minute. Smoke ate at the eyes. Tears ran down dirty cheeks, leaving white tracks. But the smell was the scariest. The grease on the wooden tray began to burn.
Red-hot casings falling nearby heated the air to sauna temperatures.
The boards smoked. The lubricant boiled, bubbled, dripped onto the floor in hot, black drops. The tank filled with the suffocating stench of burning oil and wood. But they didn't stop. Stopping meant dying. The German tankers didn't understand what was happening. By their calculations, there was 1 tank in front of them. But the density of fire coming from this lone T-34 corresponded to a battery of 3 guns. Vasily hit again and again. He didn't wait for the smoke to clear. He fired on lead, at silhouettes, at flashes. The breech of the F-34 began to change color. First, it was just dark. Then it turned gray. And now, in the gloom of the smoke-filled turret, it glowed with a dark cherry light. The metal had overheated. Paint on the gun guard blistered and peeled off in rags. The oil in the recoil mechanism was on the verge of boiling. If it boils, the gun jams dead or explodes on the next shot. But Vasily didn't think about that. He was part of the mechanism. He saw in the sight how the lead tiger suddenly jerked and stopped, shrouded in smoke. 3 hits in a row in one spot, at the junction of the turret and hull. The armor couldn't withstand the frequency of impacts. "Got one!" he screamed, but didn't hear his own voice. His ears had blocked up back in the second minute. Inside the tank, a hell of physical labor was underway. Stepan was no longer a man. He was a piston. His tunic burst on his back from the strain of muscles. Sweat flooded his eyes. He grabbed slippery, hot shells from the tray and drove them into the greedy throat of the breach. His hands were burned on red-hot metal, but he felt no pain. Adrenaline and the rhythm of the conveyor shut down his nervous system. Grisha at the rack worked like an automaton. Take, throw. Take, throw. He slipped on casings rolling on the floor, fell to his knees in the hot sludge of oil and dirt, but jumped right back up.
Go! Go!
Vasily wheezed.
They're getting close!
Outside, the earth boiled around the tank. German shells landed nearby, showering the armor with shrapnel and dirt. One hit the frontal plate. The tank rang like a bell. The optics cracked. But Vasily continued to look through the periscope, ignoring the cracks. The tray smoked harder. The grease flared with blue lights when another red-hot casing fell nearby. Grisha stomped out the fire with his boots without stopping the feed. This wasn't a duel. It was a meat grinder. Vasily's tank churned through ammunition at such speed that the metal groaned. The gun barrel elongated from the heat. Accuracy dropped, but at 300 meters it didn't matter. They were flooding the Germans with steel. The neighboring tank to the right went silent. Thick black smoke poured from it. The tank to the left backed up, firing rarely and uncertainly. Vasily's crew was left alone against an advancing wall of armor. But they shot for 3. German gunners simply didn't have time to aim. As soon as they brought their crosshairs onto the daring Russian machine, another shell flew into their armor, knocking off their aim, stunning them, forcing them to hide. 8 shots a minute. 48 shots in 6 minutes of combat. The breach glowed red like a coal in a furnace. The air in the turret heated to 140 degrees. Stepan rasped. He staggered, missing a beat. The shell launched by Grisha down the tray hit the breach, but wasn't seated.
Wake up!
Vasily turned and punched the loader in the shoulder.
Load, damn you, load! You want to live?
Stepan shook himself. His eyes were empty, pupils dilated to the full iris. It was the look of a driven horse about to fall and die. But the body remembered the movement. Hands caught the shell themselves. Impact, breach.
Fire! The casing hit the rear wall of the turret with a ring. There was no more room on the floor. They stood ankle-deep in spent casings. Hot brass burned legs through leather boots. This was the limit. The limit of metal, which was melting. The limit of wood, which was smoldering. And the limit of people, whose hearts beat at a frequency of 180 beats per minute. But the conveyor worked. Death, standing 200 meters away, couldn't get closer. Stopped by a wall of fire created by 3 half-dead men, a box of nails, and a can of axle grease. Impact. The world collapsed to the size of a pinhead, then exploded inside the skull. It wasn't sound. Sound remained somewhere beyond perception. It was pressure, as if the air itself inside the tank turned into a solid body and struck the eardrums, lungs, and eyes with the force of a hydraulic press. An 88mm German shell hit the right side of the turret. The armor held.
The angle of impact was too acute, and the slug, striking a shower of sparks, ricocheted away. But the kinetic energy of the blow didn't disappear. It passed through the steel, turning the turret into a giant bell. Vasily Zhigun was thrown chest first onto the breach. Ribs cracked. His breath cut off as if his lungs were filled with concrete. Purple circles swam in his eyes. He tried to inhale, but instead of air, hot saliva tasting of copper rushed into his throat. The dust hanging in the air settled instantly, knocked down by the shockwave.
In the silence that ensued for a second, the cooling metal could be heard. It crackled like breaking bones.
"Stepa!"
Vasily rasped. His voice was alien, gurgling. The loader lay on the floor. He wasn't wounded by shrapnel. There were no penetrations inside the tank. But he lay unnaturally, curled in a fetal position among smoking, red-hot casings. His face was gray, the color of ash.
From his mouth, in jerks, in time with convulsive breaths, pink foam came out. Barotrauma. The shockwave, reflected off the walls of the enclosed space, ruptured alveoli in the lungs. Capillaries burst from the pressure change. Vasily shifted his gaze to the periscope. Through the cracks in the glass, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A tiger. A huge gray carcass blocking half the sky. It wasn't 100 meters away anymore. It was 50. It crawled, winding brushwood into its tracks, and its long barrel with the muzzle brake was already lowering, seeking a vulnerable spot on the T-34's hull. They had 1 second, maybe 1.5. The tiger was reloading. Its crew was also stunned, but they were alive and ready to finish the job.
"Load!"
Vasily screamed. It wasn't an order, it was a cry of despair.
"Get up, Stepa! Load!"
Stepan opened his eyes. There was no awareness in them. The pupils didn't react to light. Consciousness was already fading, flooded with pain and hypoxia. But muscles remembered. The body, turned into an appendage of the gun over the last half hour, reacted to the keyword. He pushed his hands against the floor. Palms slid on a mixture of oil, blood, and soot. He rose to his knees. Then, swaying like a drunk, he straightened up. His chest heaved, making terrible, rasping sounds. Every breath cost him superhuman effort. Grisha, the radioman, huddled in the corner and, concussed, couldn't move. The conveyor stopped. Stepan stepped to the chute himself. The wooden construction was black with soot, charred in places, but the grease on it still shone. The loader grabbed a shell, the last armor-piercing one in this rack. 13 pounds of steel now weighed a ton. Stepan lifted it. His hands shook so much the shell banged against the sides of the chute, beating a tattoo. He put it on the guide, pushed. The shell, smacking, slid down, slower than before. The grease had burned off, the wood deformed. But it arrived. Stepan caught it at the breech. He leaned on the shell with the full weight of his dying body. Ram. The clang of the breech sounded like a shot in the silence. Vasily didn't wait for the report. He saw the muzzle of the tiger looking him straight in the face, the black pupil of death. He pressed the trigger. Fire. The distance was point blank, 50 meters. At that range, it is impossible to miss. The T-34's shell hit the tiger right in the gun mantlet, in the spot where the armor has a complex shape. The flash was blinding. The German tank didn't explode. It simply stopped, as if it hit an invisible wall. Thick, greasy smoke poured from its hatches. The shell jammed the turret and possibly smashed the breech mechanism inside, killing the gunner and commander. The attack choked. The other German tanks, seeing the destruction of the flagship and not understanding where such withering fire was coming from, began to crawl back behind the smokescreen. Vasily leaned back against the seat rest. His heart pounded somewhere in his throat, radiating pain into his broken ribs.
"Done," he exhaled. "Stepa, we got him."
He turned to the loader. Stepan stood leaning his back against the turret wall. His hands hung limply at his sides, black with soot, with white knuckles. He stared straight ahead but saw neither the commander nor the blackened breech, nor the wooden chute they had built at night. A trickle of blood, already dark and thick, ran down his chin. He slowly, as if in a dream, began to slide down. His legs buckled. He sat on the pile of spent casings. His head fell onto his chest. Vasily tore off his headset. The ringing in his ears was unbearable, but silence broke through it, a terrible, cottony silence in which the loader's breathing could not be heard. The commander slid from his seat and crawled to his friend. He grabbed him by the shoulders, shook him. Stepan's head flopped limply, like a rag doll's. Vasily put his ear to his chest, right to the oily, sweat-soaked tunic. Silence. Stepan's heart had stopped. It wasn't pierced by shrapnel. There was no bullet in the body, but it was torn by the rhythm. A tempo of 8 rounds a minute, heat of 140 degrees, poisoning by powder gases, and the terrible blow of the blast wave had done their job. The human motor failed. The mechanism they created, lubricant, chute, conveyor, worked perfectly. It allowed the tank to shoot faster than was physically possible, but the price for this speed became the resource of the human organism. Stepan gave everything to the machine. He became part of the transmission that transferred the will to win to the shells. And when the load exceeded the breaking point of the material, not steel, but living flesh, he broke. Vasily looked at his friend's hands. There wasn't a living spot on his fingers. Solid abrasions, burns, ingrained grease. These hands, already dead, had just rammed the last shell. Reflex proved stronger than death. "At ease," Vasily said quietly. "At ease, Stepa." He closed his friend's eyes. The eyelids were hot. In the corner, Grisha stirred. He raised his head, saw Stepan sitting motionless, and understood everything. The radio man didn't scream. He had no strength to scream. He simply buried his face in his knees and shook in soundless weeping. Vasily sat on the floor in a puddle of oil and blood. He looked at the wooden tray. The boards had burned through in several places. Nails stuck out. The grease had turned into a black crust. This ugly structure saved their lives. It destroyed 16 German tanks. But it killed Stepan. War is not just ballistics and armor penetration. War is an exchange. You trade sweat, blood, and life itself for seconds. Stepan bought those seconds. He paid for them at the highest rate. Vasily took a rag and covered the loader's face. Now in the tank there were 2 living, and 1 hero. But the word hero seemed inappropriate here. Too light. Stepan was a worker of war who died at his machine, fulfilling the plan at the cost of a ruptured heart. Silence descended on the scorched steppe suddenly, as if someone flipped a switch. A minute ago, the air was torn by detonations and the howl of metal, and now only crackling is heard. It is cooling engines crackling and overheated armor bursting on 16 German carcasses. Black columns of fatty petroleum smoke rise vertically, propping up the whitish July sky. There is no wind. The dust settled, revealing a picture of carnage that resembles a vehicle graveyard more than a battlefield. Lieutenant General Kuznetsov walks across ground plowed by tracks. His boots sink into the soft black earth, fluffy from explosions. He doesn't look at maps. He looks at iron. The entourage trails 10 steps behind, not daring to interfere with the inspection. The general counts. 1 tiger with a torn-off turret. 2 panthers burned to ashes. A Stug flipped by the blast wave. 16 units of heavy Wehrmacht armor. The elite of the tank forces,
turned into scrap metal on a front section 500 meters wide. Kuznetsov stops opposite the single surviving Soviet tank. Vasily Zhigun's machine stands in the revetment, its barrel, black with soot, lowered like the trunk of a tired beast. The paint on the turret has burned off completely, exposing gray steel. The tank looks dead, but the heat shimmer above the engine compartment says the machine's heart is still beating. The general's gaze slides along the ground behind the tank's stern. There, in the shadow of the tracks, rises a mountain. It isn't earth, not stones. It is brass. A pile of spent 76mm casings. There are hundreds of them. They lie mixed with dirty rags and empty grease cans. The crew threw them out through the turret hatch in rare seconds of calm, just to avoid drowning inside their own tank. The general walks closer. He picks up one casing. It is still warm. The edges of the mouth are dented, the metal covered in a strange coating, a mixture of carbon and something sticky, like wax. Kuznetsov brings the casing to his nose. It smells not only of powder, it smells of a church and a train depot. Impossible, the general says quietly. He knows the standards. He knows that the combat rate of fire of the F-34 is 5 rounds a minute in ideal conditions. This mountain of casings says they fired here at the tempo of a machine gun. It contradicts mechanics. It contradicts human physiology. Vasily's head appears from the commander's hatch. He is without a headset. His face is a black mask, on which only eyes and tear tracks washed by sweat are white. He doesn't hear the general's steps. He doesn't hear anything at all. His eardrums burst back in the middle of the battle. Vasily looks at the general with the dull glass gaze of a man who has returned from the other world but forgot his soul there. Below, by the track, stands Lieutenant Kravtsov, the same one who threatened a tribunal this morning for the wooden tray. Now he is pale as a sheet. His clean tunic is splattered with foreign blood. He helped pull wounded from the neighboring tank. Kravtsov looks at the mountain of casings, then at Vasily's black face. His lips tremble. All his academic arrogance, all knowledge of manuals and instructions, crumbled to dust before this crude, dirty truth of war. The lieutenant takes a step toward the tank. He tilts his head back. Zhigun! His voice breaks into falsetto. Comrade Sergeant Major. Vasily reads lips. He slowly, with difficulty, rolls over the side of the turret and slides to the ground. His legs don't hold him. He falls to his knees, but immediately stands up, leaning on the armor. Kravtsov walks up to him closely. The lieutenant wants to say something, justify himself, thank him, but words get stuck in his throat. He simply reaches out and touches the sergeant major's shoulder. "You were right," Kravtsov whispers. "Forgive me, brother. If not for that chute, we would have all died here." Vasily doesn't answer. He doesn't need apologies. Words now have no weight. Only the weight they are about to pull out of the loader's hatch matters. General Kuznetsov approaches the crew. He sees the state of the people. Radio man Grisha sits on the ground, clasping his head in his hands, rocking from side to side. Vasily stands swaying, holding onto the tow hook.
Heroic fight.
The general's voice is firm, but respect mixed with horror shows through. "I will recommend everyone, Order of the Red Banner, the Commander, for Hero of the Soviet Union. This needs to be written into textbooks. How did you do it, sons? What were you shooting with?" Vasily looks at the general through the veil of concussion. He sees lips moving, sees the glint of gold shoulder boards, but the meaning of the words reaches him with difficulty. Orders? Medals? He shifts his gaze to his hands,
They are black, covered in scrapes, dried grease, and Stepan's blood. He feels the phantom weight of a shell. With grease, Vasily squeezes out hoarsely, barely audible. His voice sounds like grinding stones. With grease and meat, Comrade General. Kuznetsov frowns, not understanding. But Vasily is no longer looking at him. He turns to the tank. "Grisha, help!" he commands, and the radio man, sobbing, jumps up. They climb onto the armor. The general and lieutenant watch from below. Legs in boots appear from the turret hatch. Vasily pulls Stepan's body by the straps of his overalls. Heavy. A dead body is always heavier than a living one. It lacks tone. It pours through hands. Stepan appears in the light. His face is calm, but terrible. A black streak of blood has baked from his mouth. Arms bent at the elbows, fingers hooked, as if still holding an invisible shell. Muscles locked in rigor mortis at the moment of the last effort. They lower the body to the ground, lay it next to that very mountain of casings he created. The contrast cuts the eyes. Golden brass shining in the sun, and the gray, lifeless face of the man who turned this brass into victory. Vasily sits next to his friend. He takes a rag from his pocket, tries to wipe Stepan's face, but only smears the dirt. Kravtsov turns away, hiding his eyes. The general takes off his cap. "Heart," Vasily says, addressing no one. "Not shrapnel, not a bullet."
The motor stalled, over-revved. He raises his eyes to the general. There is no triumph of victory in them, no joy of a survivor, only bottomless, black fatigue. You say, hero, but he just worked, like an ox, 8 shots a minute. That isn't heroism, Comrade General. It's overload. Metal has a safety margin. A human, turns out, doesn't. The general is silent. He has nothing to answer to this truth. He understands that no award will resurrect this boy who died not from German lead, but from his own will to win, multiplied by the imperfection of technology. Vasily takes Stepan's hand, cold, stiff, unclenches the hooked fingers. On the palm is a deep cut from the sharp edge of a casing. Wax has eaten into the wound. That very wax from church candles. "There's your whole reward, Stepa," whispers the commander. "Eternal memory." The battlefield quiets down completely. Even the smoke from German tanks becomes thinner. Only this scene remains. The living, the dead, and a mountain of metal between them. Victory here doesn't look like a woman with a laurel wreath. It looks like a dirty, sweaty man sitting by a comrade's corpse, with hands shaking from overexertion. Vasily looks at the sun, which indifferently floods this polygon of death with light. It doesn't care who won, and Vasily now has to live with this silence, which is louder than any explosion. He survived because Stepan died shoving shells into the breach faster than his own heartbeat, and this debt he can never repay. The front moved west. It rolled like a heavy, clanging roller, grinding through miles of mud, leaving behind scorched villages and fresh grave mounds. The dust of the Kursk steppes changed to autumn mud, then snow, and now again the mud of 1944. Trains brought reinforcements. On the unloading platforms stood new machines, T-34 85. New turret, wide, spacious, designed for 3. The long barrel of the 85mm gun looked into the sky predatorily and confidently. It was already a different war. A war of calibers and optics, where chances were equalized by factory designers, not by suicide squads in field workshops. Vasily Zhigun stood by the ramp, watching young lieutenants accept the equipment. They walked around the machines with forms, clean, ringing, not yet deafened by cannonade. The crew now consisted of 5 people. A commander, gunner, and loader appeared in the turret. Functions were divided. The commander no longer needed to cling to the sight, bashing his hands on flywheels. He could observe, think, manage the battle. Vasily looked at his hands. Ingrained oil and powder soot had become part of the skin pigmentation. They didn't wash off with lye or sand. It was a tattoo of war. He walked up to a new machine, looked into the hatch. Spacious, powerful ventilation. Shells stowed conveniently in niches, the feed mechanism thought out by engineers in the rear, who finally read reports from the front. Wooden chutes weren't needed here. Grease on boards wasn't needed here. Melting wax in casings wasn't needed here. Technical progress made Stepan's feat unnecessary. His death became a step the designers walked on to create a tank that didn't kill its crew with physical overload. "Good machine, pup?" A young sergeant, the new loader, called out to Vasily. He had clean palms and a clear gaze. "Good," Vasily answered hollowly. "Just remember, son, the iron is new, but the physics is old. Friction hasn't gone anywhere." Vasily walked away. He felt like an archaism, a fossil mechanic from an era when tanks were fixed with a sledgehammer and a prayer. In his duffel bag, among spare underwear and rusks, lay a heavy, awkward object, a piece of a board. That same piece of shell crate, soaked in grease, soot, and blood. He had carried it with him for 6 months, not as a talisman. Talisman's a superstition. He carried it as physical evidence, evidence that a human can be harder than steel. Next to it lay a small, shapeless lump, a stub of a church candle. The wax had darkened, absorbed the dust of roads, but kept the smell. That same sweetish smell that mixed with the smell of death on that July morning. The column prepared to march. Vasily had half an hour. He knew where to look. The grave was near the station, on a knoll the artillerymen called Height Nameless. A regular mound of damp earth topped with a pyramid of welded angle iron. A star cut from a tin can rusted in the rain. The plaque was wooden, the inscription in indelible pencil almost erased, but Vasily remembered every word. Guards Private Stepan. The last name didn't matter. What mattered was the position. Loader. Vasily dropped to one knee. Mud squelched under his boot. He didn't take off his hat. Here, in front of one of his own, it wasn't necessary. They had seen each other in a hell where etiquette didn't matter. He took the piece of the chute from the bag. The wood was black, oily. It smelled of old, rancid fat. Vasily placed it on the grave, right in the wet grass. It was a strange monument, a rotten board and grease stains. But for those who understood the language of war, it was more majestic than granite. It was a tool, a working tool with which this man forged victory, breaking his life against it. Next to it, Vasily placed an oily rag, a piece of waistcloth, a symbol of mechanism cleanliness. "Receive it, Stepa," he said quietly. "New tanks have arrived, 85s. The loader can stand in them, back doesn't ache, and chutes aren't needed. Factory made them." He fell silent, listening to the wind whistle in the rusty star. "We outran time back then, Stepa. Outran it by 20 seconds. Those 20 seconds are now in every new blueprint. Engineers think they came up with it, but you came up with it. With your sinews." Vasily took out the candle stub. He didn't light it. Fire wouldn't hold in the wind. He simply pressed the wax into the soft earth at the base of the pyramid. Church chemistry returned to the earth. The circle closed. Wax that was supposed to lift prayers to the sky helped send 16 German crews and 1 Russian boy to the next world. Vasily wiped his hands on his pants. The gesture was habitual, mechanical. Hands remained dirty anyway. This dirt was now part of his DNA. He stood up. Below, on the road, diesels roared. A column of new, powerful, perfect tanks started moving west. They were going to finish the enemy, relying on armor, optics, and engine power. But Vasily knew the truth. He knew that at the base of this steel avalanche lay not only alloyed steel and gunpowder. In its foundation lay rotten boards like these, a can of cheap grease, and an overheated human heart that refused to stop until the ammo rack was empty.
Sometimes the outcome of a battle is decided not by generals and not by designers. Sometimes history is written by a dirty finger greasing a casing with wax in the dark before a fight. And victory isn't the blare of fanfares. Victory is the quiet thud of earth on a coffin lid and the smell of hot oil that stays with you forever. Vasily Zhigun turned and walked toward the train. His back was straight, but his gait heavy. He carried the weight of memory, which weighed more than any ammo load. He went to do his work further, dirty, hard, without emotions. Until the very end.